Have you ever just, stopped to think about the invisible forces shaping our world? I mean, not just the big historical stuff, but even online trends, how things just catch fire. Well, today we're taking a deep dive into a really foundational work, Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd, a study of the popular mind.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because even though it was published way back in 1895, this isn't just some dusty old book. It feels incredibly relevant still. It gives you insights into, well, modern mass movements, sure, but also online communities, protests, pretty much any kind of collective action you see today.
Right, so our mission here is to really try and unpack how individuals actually change when they become part of a crowd. Why does emotion seem to just take over from reason? And how do leaders manage to sway these huge groups? We want to explore the crowd's, well, it's powerful and sometimes, frankly, dangerous potential. Okay, so Le Bon kicks off his book, The Crowd, with this really bold statement, especially for 1895.
Hmm.
He basically says we are entering the age of crowds. He draws this contrast, right, between a past where maybe a few intellectual elites shaped things, and his present, where he saw the masses, the crowd, becoming the main force driving history.
Yeah, he was seeing it everywhere. Revolutions, these big mass movements, popular uprisings, they weren't rare events anymore. They were becoming central. He argued the crowd was now setting the direction for whole nations, often just steamrolling over old institutions and traditions.
So what is this crowd then, in Le Bon's view? He's pretty clear it's not just, a bunch of people standing around. He calls it a psychological phenomenon. Something happens where individual consciousness sort of fades,
Hmm.
and it's replaced by this collective mind.
A collective mind that's impulsive, very emotional, and often completely irrational.
That sounds like quite a shift.
It really is. He describes individuals almost losing their sense of self, their individuality, personal responsibility. That diminishes. Instinct starts to take over. The crowd acts like a single entity, almost like one organism with a shared soul, reacting to things instinctively, almost like, well, he uses the phrase like a wild animal.
Okay, so he lays out what this collective mind is. But then he goes further, right? He tries to identify the actual psychological principles, the laws that govern how this crowd behaves. What are those key ideas? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. He boils it down to three main principles. First, there's anonymity. Think about it. Inside a large crowd, you feel kind of invisible, right? You're just one face among many.
Yeah, you blend in.
Exactly. And that anonymity, Le Bon says, lowers your inhibitions. It encourages behavior you'd probably never dream of doing if you were alone in private life.
It's like wearing a mask almost.
Yeah,
Feeling free to act differently because nobody knows it's you.
that's a great way to put it. And flowing from that is the second principle, contagion. Ideas, and especially emotions, spread incredibly fast in a crowd, like a virus, he says.
Wow.
Yeah, a single spark of anger or maybe fear can just ignite the whole group almost instantly. It's this rapid emotional transfer.
Okay. Anonymity, contagion. And the third one was suggestibility.
Yes, suggestibility. Crowds are highly suggestible. They tend to absorb ideas, often without any real questioning. A speaker who uses simple, really emotional language can sway the entire group pretty easily, bypassing critical thinking altogether.
That's quite a combination. Anonymity, contagion, suggestibility. It really explains how crowds can be both, well, heroic and absolutely savage, doesn't it?
It does. They can unite for something truly noble, spurred on by shared feeling. But that same mechanism, those same principles, can lead to terrifying violence or mob justice. It's the same psychological engine, really, just pointed in different directions depending on the spark and the suggestion.
So given all that, it makes sense why Le Bon emphasizes that crowds aren't driven by reason, it's emotion, pure and simple.
Overwhelmingly emotion, yes, and their feelings are intense, very polarized. A crowd might be incredibly generous one moment or brutally cruel the next. You rarely find balance or moderation.
And you mentioned this interesting moral duality.
Yeah.
How does morality work differently in a crowd compared to just one person?
Right, it's quite distinct from individual ethics. A crowd can act with fierce loyalty, maybe defending one of its own, or with brutal vengeance against an enemy. They can show incredible bravery, seem immune to pain or punishment, even make huge sacrifices for the group's cause. But they're also capable of merciless destruction.
That's what makes them so unpredictable, I guess, and so powerful.
Exactly, that volatile mix.
So, okay, if emotion is king, how do ideas even take root? Or how does a crowd reason about anything, if that's even the right word?
That's a really key part of his analysis. Le Bon digs into how the crowd's mind actually processes information. First off, ideas. Crowds, he argues, aren't really creators of ideas. They tend to adopt simple, often pre-digested beliefs. Things presented as slogans or powerful symbols. Anything complex is just too slow, too demanding for this collective mind.
So complex arguments just don't land.
Pretty much. And as for reasoning, well, logic, as we normally think of it, barely plays a role. Instead, they use what Le Bon called pseudo-reasoning. It's like drawing emotional conclusions that look logical on the surface, but they're actually rooted entirely in feelings, not facts.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure, like a crowd might feel incredibly strongly about something, maybe outraged, and that feeling itself becomes the proof. If we feel this angry, the pseudo-reasoning goes, then this must be true, or this person must be guilty, regardless of any actual evidence.
Ah, okay. I see. And what about their imagination?
He describes it as quite primitive, actually. Crowds are captivated by the spectacular, the legendary, the dramatic. They tend to exaggerate things, simplify them, distort reality. So a minor event might get blown up into a miracle. A fiery political speech isn't just a speech, it's perceived as, I don't know, a call to revolution, a prophecy.
So it's like this mind rejects nuance, loves drama, and feels its way to conclusions.
You've got it. It's resistant to logic, resistant to facts, because it operates on this entirely different emotional wavelength.
Which leads us to one of Le Bon's perhaps more evocative claims, that the beliefs held by crowds are essentially religious in nature, even if the topic is totally secular, like politics. He says they take on that emotional tone of religion, blind faith, fierce intolerance for anyone who disagrees, and this almost worshipful attitude towards symbols or leaders.
Precisely. The crowd believes with this intense fervor, and once that belief sets in, logic or evidence trying to counter it, it's useless. Once an idea or even a person becomes sacred in the eyes of the crowd, it's defended with fanatical intensity. All opposition just gets shut down.
Okay, so you have this collective mind, emotional, suggestible, operating with blind faith. What does that mean for leadership? It seems like a crowd without a leader would just be chaos.
Utter chaos, yeah.
Yeah.
But Le Bon points out that a charismatic figure can step in and completely transform that. They provide focus, organization.
And these leaders, are they necessarily the wisest or most ethical people?
Not at all, according to Le Bon. What they are is masters of emotional manipulation. They know how to appeal to the heart, not the head. They simplify complex issues down to these really basic emotional appeals. And their main tools are things like repetition, constant affirmation, and powerful imagery. The leader almost becomes a kind of prophet figure for the crowd.
Le Bon also briefly touches on classifying crowds, right?
Right.
He makes a distinction.
He does. He talks about homogeneous crowds groups where people share characteristics like, say, a political party or a specific sect. They tend to be a bit more stable.
Okay.
And then heterogeneous crowds, these are more diverse, like a random street mob. More volatile, maybe. But crucially, he says both types are ultimately governed by the same psychological laws we've been talking about. Anonymity, contagion, suggestibility, they apply across the board.
Got it. So let's talk about how these collective opinions actually form. How do they take root and solidify?
He outlines 3 really powerful mechanisms for that. The first is affirmation, just stating something boldly, with conviction, again and again. The crowd starts to accept it without needing proof.
Just hearing it asserted confidently is enough.
Often, yes. Which ties into the second mechanism, repetition. Ideas hammered home over and over and over. They gradually become accepted as truth, just deeply ingrained.
Okay, affirmation, repetition, and the third.
Prestige. Ideas gain enormous power if they're associated with someone or something the crowd already respects. A famous leader, a long-standing tradition, a revered institution. That association lends the idea weight, makes it easier to accept.
And Le Bon's point is that once these opinions are formed through these methods,
They're incredibly difficult to change. Almost impossible, he argues. Trying to use reason or present contrary evidence at that point, it's usually futile. The belief is locked in emotionally.
which makes sense then. When he talks about the means leaders use to influence crowds, they aren't usually logical arguments. He points to things like powerful images, flags, potent symbols, maybe dramatic events that really stir the crowd's emotions.
Absolutely. Visuals are huge. And then there are words and formulas, those catchy slogans, those simple phrases like liberty, justice, the people's will, that act as shortcuts for thinking. The words themselves carry immense emotional weight.
And illusions, that sounds important too.
Critically important. Le Bon argues that crowds fundamentally need and live on illusions. They crave myths, powerful narratives, more than they crave factual truth. These illusions provide hope, a sense of direction, a shared purpose.
So the actual truth of the matter is often secondary.
Often irrelevant, frankly. What resonates is the emotional appeal, the constant repetition, the confidence of the speaker, the power of the illusion. That's what moves the crowd.
And he even suggests there's a pattern to how these beliefs spread, right? Not just random, but stages like incubation, outbreak.
Yes. Incubation, outbreak, propagation, and then stabilization. It suggests that even this seemingly chaotic process has a kind of internal logic and evolution. It underlines that crowd behavior, while irrational, isn't entirely random. It follows predictable pathways.
Okay, but Le Bon isn't just describing this neutrally. He definitely sees dangers, right?
Yeah.
Limitations.
Oh, absolutely. It's vital to remember that. While crowds can inspire great courage or unity for a noble cause, their core characteristics, the irrationality, the intolerance, the suggestibility, make them incredibly vulnerable to manipulation. And that can easily lead to violence, grave injustice, widespread destruction. He's very clear about the downsides.
He specifically warns about the tyranny by the majority, doesn't he? That a crowd might overthrow a king.
But then turn around and install a dictator. Yes. The power is immense, but it's directionless without a leader and potentially tyrannical when it finds one.
So summing up Loam's work, The Crowd,
Uh-huh.
it's had a massive impact.
Undeniably. It remains one of the most influential studies of mass psychology ever written. I mean, his insights ended up shaping thinking in so many areas. Political strategy, advertising, propaganda techniques, even revolutionary theory. People read Le Bon to understand how to move the masses.
And it feels incredibly timely now, doesn't it? In our digital age, with social media basically amplifying all these crowd dynamics on a global scale. You look at online mobs, the way ideas go viral, the power of influencers. It feels like Le Bon described it over a century ago.
It really does echo his observations, the speed of contagion, the power of simple emotional messages, the role of leader-like figures. It's all there, just playing out on screens now.
So the core takeaway is,
I think it's that understanding the psychology of the crowd is absolutely fundamental to understanding how society works, how history unfolds, how power operates.
Yeah. Le Bon's work is a powerful reminder, isn't it? That reason, individuality, they can be pretty fragile things. And that just beneath the surface of our civilized world, these more primal collective forces are always